7 of the 12 main slate games have 52-point Vegas totals. And there's lots of wide receiver injuries to look at in our wide receiver segment. Some might be coming back this week who missed last week. We'll talk about all those things and more on the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid presented by DraftKings. This is our Week 4 edition of the show, and we're going to start off where we always do, which is with John Lee telling us about the Vegas lines. John, it is a crazy high Vegas total week. Tell us more about it.
It is. It's a crazy high. It broke the Vegas value chart this week. I needed my Tuesday back. Otherwise, I was just going to be populating the entire thing with every player in the NFL. Typically, what I do for 1-star, 2-star, and 3-star plays respectively is basically 24, 26, and 28 or above cutoffs. Right. Had I done that this week, it would have been literally about 75% of the league. So I bumped it up. We're just seeing unprecedented scoring right now, and we could talk a little bit about that throughout the show. But I think the lack of fans in the stands has made offenses much more productive and efficient, and we're seeing it in the form of points, which is great. It makes the game more exciting. And this week, topping the list, believe it or not, is the Rams going up against the Giants and their hapless defense. They've got an implied team total of 30.5 points. And I said just below that, the Dallas Cowboys are about 30.3 going up against Devin's Cleveland Browns. Both these games, or at least the second game, I guess, is more stackable than the first. Seattle, Miami, Kansas City, New England. I think we've got about half of the games on the main slate this week are going to be Vegas totals of above 50 points. We're just seeing things right now that we've not seen before. So it's going to make for a really interesting week in both cash games and GPPs, and I'm excited to talk about it tonight.
Yeah, and we've got 5 teams with implied totals of at least 30 points. So we need to help our viewers and listeners figure out which of these big scoring games are going to be the biggest scoring games. And we're going to start with some quarterbacks. Oh, be sure not to play anybody on the Steelers or the Titans. That's another tip there, since that game got pushed out of this week. Devin, let's talk about some quarterbacks. Who do you like at quarterback this week?
Fitzmagic is my starting quarterback going against Seattle.
He's so dang cheap this week. It's hard to ignore him.
400 against the Seattle defense that, they've been one of the, if not the worst defenses in the league. And it's a bit risky. There's a ton of great options at the top, which we'll get to, but they've allowed 1,300 passing yards through the first 3 weeks of the season. And their defense, their secondary is incredibly banged up. Jamal Adams is dealing with a groin injury. He's questionable for this week. So why not? At 5,400, we'll talk about running backs, and there's a running back that I want to force into my cash games for sure. But I think that Fitzmagic is very safe to throw for 300 yards in a game that they will be behind in. And on DraftKings, getting that bonus will almost assuredly get him to value.
Phil, what do you think here? You're a little bit more on the GPP side of things here. Do you got your eye on Ryan Fitzpatrick this week, or you got some other quarterbacks in mind?
I'm a little bit worried that the Seahawks are just such a better team than the Dolphins, that even though their defense stinks, Fitzpatrick is just so Jekyll and Hyde anyway. You never know what you're going to get there. But I get it. He's cheap, and he's actually coming off a really good, efficient game. And Seattle is just a wreck.
And he lets you sing a fun song.
He does.
That's the key.
Yeah, personally, I've this is going to be one of those plays where I tell you about it and then I talk myself out of it as I'm going through it. But I think that Joe Burrow has a pretty good price at 6,300, going up against Jacksonville, who just allowed Fitzpatrick to complete 18 of 20 passes and 2 touchdowns, not to mention 4 touchdowns to Ryan Tannehill in the previous game. We know that the Bengals are going to be throwing. It's what they do. The reason that I'm a little bit concerned is because even though the Bengals are running a lot of plays, they're doing it because they've been required to do it. And I wonder if they're going to be required to do it this week, or if it's going to be more of a game where maybe Joe Mixon finally reaches his ceiling. It could just end up being an ugly game between two bad teams, but you got to like what you've seen from Burrow so far, and the Jacksonville defense is pretty soft. So I'm definitely going to be mixing them into GPP lineups either way.
John, would you take Burrow at 6,300 on DraftKings or Cam Newton for $100 more here?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about cash games, it's definitely not, and we're not entirely sure with Phil whether or not he was talking about cash there. I'm guessing that was more of a GPP play.
Yes, that was tournaments.
Yeah,
for sure. For cash, I'm actually I gave the dichotomous symbol of we really don't know what John's thinking when he was talking about Ryan Fitzpatrick, because for the pick I was this, and for the singing I was this. So I was kind of in between on that. But I would say, I'm actually speculating as to who, he's going with Fitzpatrick. And by the way, I think that's the play this week, pay down at quarterback, because I'd rather pay up for other players. And I heard Devin say that. I'm guessing he likes Kamara or Zeke Elliott. And I would challenge him as I'm going through some of my picks to start thinking about what I would like to hear tonight is one song for a player he likes at every position. So you're one for one.
That's a lot of pressure.
We just lost half of our viewers.
Yeah. I mean, if we didn't lose them by now, we're not going to lose them after that first Fitzmagic thing.
I mean, I could talk about Nick Chubb, but this is a family show, so we're not going to do that.
It's a kid's show. So Fitzpatrick is probably the way I'm going to go. The guy has 25. He's got back-to-back 25-point performances over the past 2 weeks. He did have a stinker in week 1. But this Seattle defense, as Devin's talked about, is hobbled. Jamal Adams got hurt last week. We're not sure if he's going to play this week. It's just, I love the salary at 5,400, and I can do so much more at other positions. And I've gone on record in my article in the past talking about how typically I like to save down in cash games for quarterbacks because the volatility of the scoring there is so much less than other positions. And so if I can do that and feel okay about it, I'm going to do that. So he's the guy. If you're going to spend up a little bit, I don't mind going to Deshaun Watson against Minnesota at 6,600. Our projections have him clearly above 3x value. But DraftKings did kind of bump up their scoring, almost FanDuel-esque, if you will, in the sense that they're expensive quarterbacks. I think I saw one of them is above 8,100. Anybody remember?
Lamar Jackson is 8,100.
Yeah, Lamar Jackson's 8,100, and that's about as high as I've seen. So I wouldn't go there this week in cash games. In terms of GPPs, I'm curious what you guys think about Teddy Bridgewater going up against Arizona. 5,600. He's throwing the ball quite a bit. DJ Moore is going to be a fan favorite this week. A lot of plays. I don't know. He's a guy that I've got my eye on at a cheap price. And then on the top end, we saw it on Monday night. I don't know how you get away from Patrick Mahomes at 7,400 against New England. New England has shut down some other, or at least contained some other offenses, but we just watched the Chiefs run all over a pretty good Ravens defense on Monday night, and I just don't know how they stop them. And I think Mahomes should be the guy's 8,100, not Lamar Jackson.
Devin, let me come back to you. Who else you got a quarterback? You don't have to sing about these other guys.
Yeah.
Not until running back.
Yeah. Thanks. And if you like my singing, give us a thumbs up on this video. It does help us a lot grow this channel. Shameless plug. And if you don't like it, give me a thumbs down. That's all right, too.
Lord, there it goes.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
I'll be right back.
Don't do that. Anyway, I can't do Mahomes this week because I think there's two quarterbacks in the relatively same price range that I like more, and that's Josh Allen and Kyler Murray. What Josh Allen is doing, I mean, if the season ended today, he'd be the MVP, and I don't think it would be particularly close. Russell Wilson would be in there too, but it's those two guys. And to get a guy at 7,300 against the Raiders defense has been okay. They're middle of the road. There's nothing special against them. But what Allen is doing, he's basically Cam Newton in Cam Newton's prime. He's running the ball. He's the red zone target or red zone option. And if you're looking for just pure upside, I think at this point, he's a GPP play every single week, regardless of the matchup. I just don't think you don't need to stack him. He's a guy that you can just play, by himself and hope he runs in for 2 touchdowns. Kyler Murray disappointed a lot of people last week. He was okay, nothing special, but he was pretty highly rostered, and he's going up against a Carolina defense that we know they've had trouble stopping the run, and last week they had trouble stopping the pass, allowing 330 yards to Justin Herbert. So I think this is a game where you could see a lot of running again from Murray, particularly as he gets to that second level, which we've seen, like I mentioned, we've seen Carolina really struggle. So I'm looking for quarterbacks with rushing upside, and I think both Allen and Murray have that. I do like the Watson call. Burrow I can't get behind just because he's such a game script guy, and when they get behind, those are the types of games that I want Joe Burrow in, and I think that this game will be pretty close.
I think you just made the Bills Mafia happy. They've been dogging us a little bit for not mentioning Josh Allen, and so hopefully
they should be happy. I mean,
yeah,
who cares what we say?
Yeah, exactly. Their team's winning. They love it, right? He's been playing great. Josh Allen has. The Bills look good. Phil, any other quarterbacks you have your eye on?
The only other guy on my list that hasn't been mentioned is someone I tried out last week that didn't work out, and that's Matthew Stafford. I think that game could go back and forth with the Saints. There's a high total there, just like there is in most games this week. But the Saints are top 5 in fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks, and they've faced an old Tom Brady and Derek Carr in 2 of those weeks. Stafford's got Galladay back. He's got TJ Hockenson in a really good spot. And even though he didn't really light up the box score last week, he did complete 71% of his passes, which was a season high. And I think that it's a matter of time before we see a ceiling game. So if that game could go back and forth, I don't think that anybody's going to be on the Lions side too heavily. And in tournaments, I could see that being a good contrarian play.
Any other thoughts on quarterbacks before we move on? All right. Use those YouTube comments to tell us who you like in terms of picks this week. Tell us who your favorite stack is, what quarterbacks you're playing. Let's talk about some running backs. We do have some injuries here to take a look at. Leonard Fournette did not practice on Thursday. He's got an ankle injury. Looks like Chris Carson might go this week. He got limited practice in on Wednesday and Thursday, but keep an eye on that. We're also keeping an eye a little bit on Kareem Hunt, who didn't practice Thursday. May or may not impact sort of Nick Chubb's touch count. And then the Bears lost Tariq Cohen last week to injury. Let's go to Phil first on running backs. Phil, talk to me a little bit about some of the guys you like this week.
Sure. Up at the top, a couple of the guys mentioned Alvin Kamara already. He has staked his claim as the best running back in fantasy football so far in 2020. 86 combined DraftKings points over the last 2 games. I don't think that you could do much better. I know that Michael Thomas is coming back, and I guess that any infringement on Kamara's targets and high leverage opportunities for scoring are not a great thing. So in GPPs, where I think he goes off at least 25% rostered, I might think twice about exceeding the field's exposure on that number. But I think if I were playing cash games, Kamara would be one of the first guys I'd be looking at. Also towards the top, I like Dalvin Cook. The Texans have allowed the 4th most DraftKings points to running backs this year. They have been just trampled over by Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the Ravens trio of running backs, and most recently James Conner last week. And Cook showed us last week that he could still get it done with almost 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I think there could be a lot of scoring in that game. So I like that as one to stack up, and I like Cook on the Viking side. For tournaments, I think my favorite running back of the week is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. The roster percentage is going to be in the middle on him, not too high, maybe 10%, 12%, 15 max. And I think that DraftKings gave him a soft price because of the New England matchup, but I don't think that New England has done anything to warrant that type of treatment to opposing running backs. They haven't proven anything. They faced Miami's rushing offense, which is anemic. Chris Carson got him for 20 DraftKings points. And then the Raiders, they kind of got game scripted, their running backs did, out of last week's game, but they ran for 5.8 yards per carry. So the Chiefs have a 30-point total. They're favored by 7. It's just a classic running back heavy game script. He's got at least 25 touches, Edwards-Helaire does, in 2 out of 3 games this year. And unlike week 1, he's been involved as a pass catcher the last 2 weeks. So I think you've got the clear lead back in the best offense in football, in a spot where a lot of points should be scored. And I don't think, despite a really good price on him, that the field is going to be way overweight. So I'm liking him in all formats, especially tournaments.
Nice. John, who do you like at running back?
I have a song.
Oh, okay.
Before he takes my play.
Go ahead, Devin. Take it away.
Here's to you, Mr. Robinson. James Robinson going up against Cincinnati. Cincinnati has allowed 6 running backs to run for over 60 yards in 3 games. This is a game where James Robinson emerges as the number 1 guy in Jacksonville, and I think he has upside. I don't know that I trust him enough in cash, but I do think that in a GPP format, he's going to go underlooked just because of the Thursday night breakout play. That typically the guys there, people tend to forget about him, or guys coming off of the bye weeks, people tend to forget about him. James Robinson, 6,500 on DraftKings. I think he's 6,600 on FanDuel. Really good price over there as well. And high upside guy against this Bengals anemic defense.
Nice. Excellent song usage. John, back to you with less songs.
I didn't know any Drake songs, which
how
is
do I
Kenyon
follow
Drake.
that?
But
I want to follow up on the Edwards-Helaire commentary. He's also one of my favorite picks. I threw up the yellow sign, but I do think he's going to be quite popular. My guess is going to be somewhere between 20 and 25%. I don't know if that changes your opinion, Phil, but I don't think he's going to go as overlooked as you suspect he's going to. That said, he's had a couple games against pretty tough defenders. He's gone up against the Chargers and the Ravens, who are the number 2 and number 4 DVOA defense, respectively. All the reasons that Phil's already said. I think he's an excellent play this week. And, for what it's worth, if he ends up at 20 or 25%, I'll probably be in that ballpark on him. Despite that, I still think he's a great play, but I just don't know that he's going to go overlooked. Coming, I guess, backwards into cash games, Kamara is probably the guy that I'm most excited about for reasons that have already been stated, so I won't rehash those. At the lower end, because if you're going to go high, if you're going to go 8K for Kamara, you're going to have to save some salary somewhere. I think if Fournette doesn't play, Ronald Jones becomes interesting. We record this on Thursday night, so it's always really kind of difficult to know for certain what's going to happen. But if I'm not mistaken, I can quickly check. But I think Ronald Jones
practice today.
Okay, so and he's 4,700, and he likely gets the bulk of the carries. I know earlier in the week we had Fournette projected for about 10 fantasy points, and he was splitting that up against Ronald Jones just short of 10. So let's say he gets 80% of those. That's about 16 fantasy points at 4,700. That's more than 3x value. I suspect he's going to end up chalk as long as Fournette doesn't practice tomorrow being Friday. Mike Davis against Arizona, it didn't resonate with these guys earlier, me going after some of these Carolina Panthers, but he's only 5,700, and I think he's caught, if I'm not mistaken, 15 passes so far, or something close to that. Over the past few weeks, he's done quite well in catching passes and pulling it up. Yeah, he's got 16 receptions over the past 2 weeks, 90 all-purpose yards and a touchdown last week, 75 all-purpose yards the week prior, and he should continue to see the bulk of the carries and receptions out of the backfield there. I think he's worth playing. And then I'm going to go opposite for GPPs now. I'm switching gears to GPPs. I'm going to go opposite Phil. I think this is a Joe Mixon week. For almost the same reason he gave it, I just had a little slightly different interpretation. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year. This is a team that's thrown almost 70% of their offensive plays have been through the air because, as Phil pointed out, all they've been doing is losing. And this is a game where they're actually projected to win. They're about 3-point home favorites. And if you look at Jacksonville in terms of their DVOA defense, I have them as a funnel defense. They're 8th against the pass and 21st against the run. It's still a bit early on that, and we'll talk about equilibration week 4, week 5 in terms of how things normalize.
I struggle with that one a little bit.
Say again?
I struggle with that DVOA a little bit. They shut down Derrick Henry. They shut down Jonathan Taylor. The numbers, I don't know if they're factoring in last year where they were the worst defense in football, but they've been okay this year.
They, in fairness, shut down Derrick Henry. I combined them. Shut them down is relative, right? I mean, Tannehill just never stopped. He just kept throwing and throwing and throwing. They never needed to throw the ball or to run the ball that day, which is completely against what Vrabel does. But I don't know. We'll see. I just think that this is a good week for Mixon to get back on track. The game script changes things for them, and
he's super cheap, so why not?
Yeah, and nobody's going to go with him because he hasn't done anything to date.
All right, more running backs, Devin.
I do like Mike Davis quite a bit. I think that he will be the most popular cash game play along with Kamara. I don't think Edwards-Helaire gets up to 25%. Just because those Davis and Kamara will both be extremely popular as well. The other guy that I kind of like, and we talked about it at the opening, how are the Rams going to score points? So is it Darrell Henderson? He had 20 carries last week. I mean, he's only 5,800 against the Giants. That seems too cheap against, what are they, John? The highest projected team this week?
They've got the highest implied team total at 30.5. I've got Henderson as a GPP selection. The Giants are 25th against the run. I don't know they can get there in cash because, what's happening with the ancillary backs? I know last week he had a pretty clear-cut command of that backfield, but is Malcolm Brown coming back? What do we know about some of the other backs as of Thursday night? I got the feeling when I was looking through things that he wouldn't have the sole possession of the backfield this weekend.
Brown had 7 carries last week, so didn't do anything with it. And I think that who's their coach? McVay came out and said that he deserves the lead role there, but Henderson, that is. So, probably he's a GPP play. I can get behind that just because he's not in the must-play category that Davis and Kamara are. I think that this is a week where everyone is going to have the same 2 running backs in cash. It's fairly obvious.
What about a guy that's popping on our projections is David Johnson against Minnesota at 5,600. What do you guys think about him going up against Minnesota?
The matchup's a good one, but he's been awful. And I know he's played 2 difficult defenses in Baltimore and Pittsburgh, but the lack of touches has been a concern. He only had 11 carries against Baltimore and 13 against Pittsburgh. As a GPP play, sure, because Minnesota has allowed 119-2 to Derrick Henry and 101-1 to Jonathan Taylor, but he's not a guy that I'm overly excited about.
In terms of projections, I've got him as being the second most likely to reach value behind Kamara, for what it's worth.
I think on that note, Duke
Ahead
Johnson's
of Mike Davis? He's only 100 more.
Duke Johnson's health is going to play into that, right?
Yeah. Duke Johnson is coming back from what I've read. That is the part that kind of gives me pause. I don't know that you need to go there in cash. I'm just pointing it out that, if you're strictly a numbers guy and you're looking at projections, he's got to be in consideration because he's one of the 3 or 4 running backs I've got that are projected at least 3x value. And as I said, he's second behind Alvin Kamara.
What about my guy Carlos Hyde if Carson doesn't play?
Don't you hate going with old guys?
Oh, I was all on Hyde last year.
Yeah, he picked a couple of good spots for Hyde last year.
I think against Miami, he's more of a FanDuel play because he doesn't catch passes, but
right.
I think that, if going up against Miami in a game that Seattle could get out to a pretty early lead, and without Carson, he could see 15, 20 touches.
Devin, when you said that there's two obvious cash game running backs here, it was Kamara and
Mike Davis.
Mike Davis. Ronald Jones seems pretty enticing if Fournette
The matchup's
sits.
not great, and
Yeah.
I think he's in play for sure, but the Chargers have a pretty good defense.
Yeah.
And do you need two cheap running backs and a cheap quarterback if you go Fitzpatrick? Don't know. So I think that there will be a little bit of variation. He will be in play as that third running back, but he's not the must-play guy that the other two are, in my opinion.
Yeah. Phil, any other running backs you have in mind? No one's mentioned Ezekiel Elliott or Josh Jacobs here.
Jacobs, I have on my list as contrarian GPP play, just because he's going to dominate the touches in that backfield, but I'm not particularly excited about playing a whole lot of him. I'll go over the field just from a game theory perspective, but I don't love the matchup against Buffalo for Raiders running backs. I had one more name on my list, and this is pure GPP, but if you believe that the Dallas offense puts up a lot of points this week on the Browns, and do we generally believe that they should put up a lot of points on the Browns?
I don't know if I believe that, but okay.
All right.
Are you saying Tony Pollard?
No, I'm saying Kareem Hunt. I think that if you follow that game, and by the way, he has a groin injury. I know he's been out of practice these last 2 days.
Yeah.
So that might ruin the play. But I think if there's ever been a Kareem Hunt game script where he's going to see 50% of the snaps, Dallas gets out to a big lead, and he ends up the guy that's touching the ball most. He's efficient with his touches. He's explosive. He's cheap enough. He's right in that price range where nobody's going to be looking at him because you've got Mike Davis down lower. You've got Edwards-Helaire. You've got Robinson. You've got Kenyon Drake. They're all in that same cluster. I think he's well worth 5, 8, 10% of GPP lineups based on the possibility that game shoots out and they're using Hunt in catch-up mode.
Yeah.
Well, what do you
as
do
long as he
there?
practices.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm going to go on the side that he's not going to play. Does that entice you then to Chubb getting everything out of the backfield?
Yeah, I would play a ton of Nick Chubb if he had that backfield to himself. They did say that they don't think the groin is a big deal. I wouldn't be shocked to see him back at practice tomorrow. Maybe it's just some maintenance, but it's definitely a wait and see. I guess that the takeaway here is that there's value in the backfield one way or the other.
Yeah, I think that's a good take. We'll keep an eye on that injury situation. Please hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber of our YouTube channel, and hit that bell so you get notifications, and give us a thumbs up because Devin's singing is so good this week.
I don't have a song here.
I'll come to you last then. We're going to go to John first. Let's talk about some injuries. We got quite a few injuries we're watching with wide receiver. Chris Godwin is out. It also looks like that Scotty Miller isn't going to go this week, and so that may leave more touches for the rest of the Tampa Bay pass catchers. It looks like Michael Thomas could come back this week. He got in a limited practice on Wednesday and Thursday. Keep an eye on that. We also could see the return of DJ Chark. DJ Chark.
That doesn't count.
No, it
doesn't count.
No? I was trying to set Devin up there. I was trying to set him up. And there's a few others we could mention along the way, but those are kind of the highlights. I had to squeeze in the extra one for song purposes. John, talk about wide receivers.
All right, so Chris Godwin being out, I think, elevates Mike Evans into almost must-play territory this week. He's super cheap, 6,400. I know some people are going to worry about that matchup against the Chargers. They do have some decent defensive backs, but Evans is one of these guys who I think is matchup proof, and he has a much better quarterback this year and get him the ball in space. I'm more than happy to go with him. Speaking of his quarterback, how about his former receiver? In fact, two of them, Julian Edelman and Edwards-Helaire this week. I think you can almost take both of those guys in cash games. It's an awful lot of the Patriots, but we know they're going to throw the ball, and you can have basically, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I'm going to guess somewhere around 70% of the market share in the passing game for short of $10,000 there. And this is a game where Cam Newton may throw the ball 40 times to keep up with Pat Mahomes and company. And then I guess the chalk in cash this week is going to be DJ Moore going up against Arizona. He's 5,600, likely headed for some touchdown regression. I think he's both an excellent cash and GPP play. The question is how high he's going to get in terms of percent rostered on a week where I suspect he's going to be very, very popular. I wouldn't be surprised if he approaches 30% by Sunday afternoon.
Phil, what do you think about those wide receiver picks?
Yep, those guys were definitely on my list. DJ Moore, I mean, at 5,600, he's a top 5 air yards guy. I was on him last week thinking that he could get the better of a difficult matchup. He couldn't, but they lowered his price to the point where anytime that you got a guy that's got 15 targets well within his range of outcomes, 5,600 is kind of crazy. Some guys that I'm looking at, has DK Metcalf become like the ultimate cash game wide receiver quietly? He's got 92 yards and a touchdown in every game. So he's become like, I should say at least 92 yards and a touchdown in every game. Last week he should have had 2 touchdowns. He had to go and hot dog it on his way into the end zone and get it punched out. Or it could have been a huge week. But, this thing where he's getting one Russell Wilson bomb a game guaranteed doesn't look like it's going anywhere. And he's just too fast and big and physical for opposing defensive backs. He looks like a bully, and he just takes it and he runs with it. And with Byron Russell, I'm not too sure. Not Byron Russell. I think he played for the Jazz back in the Michael Jordan era.
Close though.
Yeah,
Close.
Byron Jones, the Miami cornerback free agent signing. I'm not too sure if he's going to make it back this week, and that would improve things for Metcalf. But I don't think there's a wide receiver in football with a floor-ceiling combination quite like DJ Metcalf. But I'm not a cash game player, so I'm wondering what John and Devin think of that.
I think his floor is. I'm not ready to say his floor is high yet. I think that there's a bit of a Michael Gallup effect in that he can string consecutive, 2-3 games in a row together. I think there's going to be some games where his floor regresses back. I'm not ready to, and maybe it'll cost me, but I'm just not ready to say definitively, especially in a game where Seattle, I mean, if he doesn't catch one of those first 2 or 3 touchdowns, are they going to run the ball a lot? Probably. Like, I just don't know that it's his week in a cash game format.
I mean, and he's going to see Xavier Howard mostly in coverage, right? I mean,
yeah.
that's my feeling. And Xavier Howard, as you guys were talking, I looked. He's allowed 6 completions all season, and certainly he's not seen a wide receiver of DK Metcalf's ilk at this point. The issue is, I think the better play there, for what it's worth, and it seems chalky after the week he came off of, is Tyler Lockett. I'd rather go there. He's running out of the slots. The Dolphins have not really defended the slot well this year. Opposing teams tend to go interior there because of Xavier Howard on the outside. There are a lot of reasons to think about it, but for me, Metcalf is a GPP at least for another few weeks. If he continues to do what he's doing, Phil, you're right, but I don't know that we've seen that yet. I do think he's an elite talent. It's just whether or not he can get his head together, because I've seen him over the past few years do some really kind of stupid things in game, including what we saw last week, which might have been the pinnacle of that. But he's certainly, to me, not a cash game yet.
What do you think, Devin? Who do you like at wide receiver?
John, are we doing it?
Yes, we are. We are doing
Odell
it.
Beckham week, baby.
He's on my list. Yep.
5,800 against Dallas. We talked about this being a high-scoring game. He's shown some signs of life here in the past 2 weeks. I think that this Cowboys secondary is not what it used to be, for sure. I mean, they're allowing seemingly 300 yards almost every week. They can just pull it up right here. They allowed 315, 273, and 275. So I think this is a game where 280 yards at least. And if the Cowboys get up early, This is a game where Odell Beckham and the Browns will throw a significant amount, especially if Kareem Hunt misses. How else are they gonna move the ball if they fall behind?
And for those of you listeners and viewers who don't know the backstory here, you guys correct me if I'm wrong. The very first time that John and Devin met in person was at a Fantasy Aces live final where John won the live final with the ridiculous Odell Beckham Jr. catch. Is that correct?
You nailed it. Nothing more to add.
Yeah, that's why Odell Beckham Jr. has a special place in both of their hearts.
And he has also been very kind to me in live finals and qualifiers and those kinds of things. I've seen to capture his OBJ's lightning in a bottle from time to time, which I think is where Devin was coming from. But he was at the top of my GPP list this week because the Cowboys have just been horrendous in their secondary this year, and they're allowing the second most points to wide receivers. Behind only the Seattle Seahawks, who, as we said earlier today, they're atrocious.
Any love for Robert Woods?
Yeah.
I seemingly gravitate towards the guys, especially in cash. Robert Woods, Allen Robinson, these types of guys that are going to get. And I don't like Robinson this week because the matchup is really tough, but it's a. Robert Woods just is consistent. And in GPPs, I wouldn't be opposed to playing both Kupp or not in the same lineup, but both Kupp and Woods, just not knowing whether or not Kupp's going to catch a long one. But Woods, to me, it just is the model of a NFL professional receiver that just comes out and gets the job done seemingly under the radar every week.
And to kind of recap on sort of like the safer guys in cash, it sounds like, are people saying Mike Evans, DJ Moore, maybe a Patriots receiver? Is that kind of where people are leaning in cash for safety? I see John nodding a little bit. What do you think, Devin? Are those some of the guys that are high on your cash list?
I struggle a little bit with Evans. He's the only guy that I don't necessarily love. I think Keenan Allen is in play for cash, just because if we believe that the Chargers are going to get behind like they have the past couple of weeks, Keenan Allen is getting that relationship with Justin Herbert. 20 catches in the last 2 weeks, 96 yards and 132 yards. He's getting back to that number one receiver that we've seen consistent. Not going to have 3 touchdowns and 150 yards, but I think 100 yards and a touchdown with 8 catches is firmly in play. So he's a guy that I do like quite a bit. And I don't anticipate that the Chargers will be able to run the ball against Tampa Bay. No one has run the ball against Tampa Bay in like 3 years. So how are they going to move the ball? I think you're going to see a lot of Keenan Allen.
I'm also trying to wrap my head around us. We're wrapping up the receivers section, and we haven't really talked about the Cowboys offense at all. John, as a resident sort of Cowboys fan, is that appropriate here? There's just better options than Cowboys players this week?
No, you got to consider the Cowboys. I mean, they're not on my list because they're kind of obvious in the sense that they've been killing it largely all season. I think you got to watch CeeDee Lamb. I don't know, they're not really reporting much on him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's nursing an injury. He didn't play as many snaps last week in a game that I thought he was going to murder the Seattle Seahawks secondary. They've been terrible against the slot, and I had high expectations for him. And he went from something like 85% of the snaps down to just over 50%. And I almost think that he got hurt in some way or fashion there. So if you're going to avoid anybody, he would be the one. But no, Amari Cooper is definitely in play. He's going to be in play just about every week. He hasn't scored yet, so touchdown regression is certainly in his favor. Gallup is, he's one big play away from paying off his salary. Those guys are both in play. But again, with the second highest implied team total on the board, it wasn't that I didn't like them. It was just like, well, the Cowboys are in play, and I was focusing on some other teams.
I think I like Gallup more than Cooper. Just because I expect Cooper to draw Denzel Ward, where Gallup should get Greedy Williams, and Greedy it's been okay, but he's been inconsistent throughout his time in the NFL.
And I think that we made it through quarterbacks because there's a couple of other quarterbacks in the Dak Prescott range that are a little bit more appealing. And I think we made it past Ezekiel Elliott because everyone's on Kamara at the high end of the running back scale. And so I didn't want to kind of like breeze past receivers without at least talking about their offense a little bit.
No, it's absolutely fair. And for what it's worth, if we're breezing past them, that probably tells our viewers and listeners that other people might be breezing past them as well. And that's why, tomorrow, Devin, you get the percent rostered projections up. Check out where those guys are at, because if they're too low for these reasons, then you need to go overweight on the field. That certainly, that ultimately, I would say that 80% of my decision making is based off of percent rostered, where I think the field's going to be, and it's just then going above or below those projections.
Yeah, and you can check. Go ahead, Dev.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Look, we do a lot of work on matchups and top 5 and bottom 5 matchups, but once you get past those top 5 and bottom 5, maybe top 7 and bottom 7, there's this large group that is just largely the same. So defenses matter, but they don't matter nearly as much as people think, except for those outlier situations.
And to build on that, it's not something I think I've ever explicitly said, but there have been Sundays where I have projected somebody in my own GPP portfolio to say I'll have 25% share of a given player, and then there'll be an update to our roster projections, and if that goes up to the extent that it toys with my 25%. I literally have gone from 25% on a guy to taking him out of my GPP portfolio altogether. And that's how important those percent roster projections are. And you really, really need to be considering them, especially if you're a person who's entering more than a single lineup, because that's going to make all the difference. It truly is something. It took me years to kind of learn this, and it's something that certainly I'm willing to share with our viewers and listeners, but do not underestimate those projections, because they're almost the single, outside of projections and scoring, they're almost the next most important thing in terms of GPPs.
Especially if you're multi-entering like 10 lineups into a GPP. Yeah.
How many lineups do you have to play to care about it? I would say more than 5.
I would say 10 to 20 would be the minimum where I would start worrying about it.
If you're playing 5, I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, you can think about it a little, but it's not really in play. But if you're playing 10 lineups, I think you start to really keep an eye on that stuff. All right, so if you want to check out any of that content, check out our roster percentages, check out these guys' articles they write each week. Be sure to go over to footballguys.com/DFS. You're going to want our Daily Fantasy Pro subscription if you're not already a subscriber. We've got our in-season discounts running right now.
I got a song.
You got a song for a tight end? All right, we're going to go to Devin first for tight ends. Devin, hit us.
Hawk, Hockenson on heaven's door.
Hawk,
Hockenson on heaven's door.
Yeah.
I screwed it up the first time. Screwed it up the first time. No one's ever said I'm musically enabled.
But you can pick some tight ends, so tell us about why you like Hockenson.
The Saints against tight ends have been absolutely atrocious this year. They're allowing the most points to opposing tight ends. 10 receptions and 96 yards and 1.3 touchdowns per game so far this season. We know their corners. We know Marshawn Lattimore is going to shut down Kenny Galladay. This is a game where they're going to have to move the ball somewhere else, and it seems like a TJ Hockenson week.
I like it. That was maybe your best song of the
show.
That
was
awful. Like I said, it was your best song of the show. Phil, tell me who you like at tight end.
Yeah, Hockenson is a great call. I think he's going to end up being, by a significant margin, the highest rostered tight end in GPPs this week. I think the secret is going to get out, if it hasn't already, about the matchup, but in a little bit more of a sneaky way. Last week was a big week for Hockenson. It didn't show up in the box score, but he played on 82% of the snaps, which was a season high. He was hovering in the 65 to 70% range, possibly because they were ramping him up from the ankle injury that he was recovering from all offseason. That resulted in a season high 7 targets. He ran over 30 routes, so the seeds are being planted for a breakout. He's cheap, and the matchup definitely cooperates, so that's a great call by Devin. In tournaments, there's two guys. One I would consider a price pivot off of Hockenson, and that's Hunter Henry at 4,600. He's got at least 7 targets in every game this year. Justin Herbert is winging it out there. He looks pretty good. He's got double-digit DraftKings points in every game. They probably, again, will have to be throwing to keep up with Tampa. And Hunter Henry is he's a smooth route runner and historically a fantastic red zone producer, and he's without a touchdown this year, which is something that he's overdue for. So I like Henry. And at the high end, I think if you're going to pay up to be contrarian this week, I like Mark Andrews better than Travis Kelce. Bill Belichick has a history, at least in the last couple of years, of removing Kelce from the game plan. He's the one that they take out. It's allowed for some really big Tyreek Hill games as a result. But I think you're looking at something like, 5 catches, 65 yards for Kelce with maybe like a 30% chance at a touchdown, and that's not going to pay off his salary. So I like Mark Andrews better because he's going up against the football team, the Washington football team, and they've played one tight end centric offense, and that was the Eagles. And Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz both scored touchdowns combined for over 120 yards. He's coming off of 2 down games, so I don't think anybody's going to be on him for the price. And he's one of the most talented tight ends in the league. So I think in tournaments, that's a spot where you can pay up to be contrarian.
John, what do you think about tight ends?
I'm actually surprised that the guys haven't mentioned who I think is going to be the most
Darren
popular.
Waller?
Yes. I think Darren Waller is the guy who's going to be the most popular tight end this week. It's not to discount the others that have been mentioned, but I would project Waller between 15 to 20% of rosters. There's just nobody else to catch the ball in Las Vegas right now. I mean, the next man up, I think, is what it might be Phil Alexander. I don't know.
Hunter Renfrow is
Hunter Renfrow, baby. That is the spot. We didn't even mention him.
Well, in fairness, I do have Hunter Renfrow. We didn't talk about him, but he's on my GPP list at 4,600, running out of the slot, avoiding some of the superior coverage there in Buffalo. But and I don't know how high that upside is for what it's worth. It's just I think he can get to 4x. He score a touchdown, 4 catches, 80 yards, something like that. But Darren Waller is he's $600 more than Hunter Renfrow, and to me, he's the superior play at tight end this week. What do you guys think about Jared Cook's not going to be active? If he's not active, what about punting the position at cash and just going with Adam Troutman at 2,500 to be able to pay up? You're not willing to do that, Devin?
No. Not with Hockenson at 48 and Waller at 52. I think that you could be starting down 15, down 20. I mean, both of those guys are in really good spots. If they weren't there, then maybe, but not this week.
I haven't done a cash game build, and right now I would try to get Waller in because he's the guy that I want. And I am saving money in cash with Fitzpatrick, so I think I can get there. But if you're scrounging around for money at the last minute, the one position I'm always willing to punt is tight ends, and Troutman literally needs 3 catches for 40 yards, and he reaches value. And as long as you feel pretty good about everything else, you're good to go. And of course, that's a DraftKings specific play. I should call that out specifically because obviously there's a different scoring system on the other side. And then the other tight ends I have, Hockenson's already been discussed. I think he is a great play this week. And Evan Ingram going up against the Rams as well is another player that I like. I think that he's suffering from a poor quarterback play, but going up against the Rams at 4,400 in a game where they're likely going to be doing nothing but throwing the ball, I'm happy to roll him out there in tournament formats.
Any other tight ends you guys want to talk about before we move on to defenses?
Maybe Logan Thomas, but
yeah, I had him on the list here a little bit.
Maybe.
Yeah, there's so many other good options. It's hard to go with Logan.
Yeah,
Thomas
for our roster percentages, we have Kelce, Waller, Hockenson, Ingram. So we nailed the 4 top guys.
Yeah,
Let's
talk about
just farther down the list, but
Yeah, let's talk about defenses. Devin, why don't you go ahead and talk to us about your defense pick? Usually you go pretty cheap on the defenses.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's right this year. I mean, it's hard. I think that realistically, I'm always a guy that likes to go cheap. It's stuck in my DNA. I sort of like if I can find the room, I might be paying up for defenses this week.
Whoa.
I think the Indianapolis Colts have the best defense in football, and going up against the Chicago Bears, I'm still not a believer in Nick Foles. I know that he had a comeback last week, but
against the amazing Falcons defense.
Yeah, I mean, they added who did they add in this offseason? Xavier Rhodes and DeForest Buckner, I think. So far this year, they've been one of the top defenses. They're sort of in the middle at 3,300 on DraftKings. They're the defense I'd like. I mean, the Rams are obvious at the top, but I just don't know that I can get there. And then the Bengals on FanDuel at 3,400 against Jacksonville. If you want to go way down against Gardner Minshew does turn the ball over. I think that they're in an okay spot.
What do you think, John? Defenses.
I mean, look, if you've got the money, pay up. The Ravens going against Washington. If you watched Washington last week, Dwayne Haskins. Sorry, Devin, but the guy's not an NFL quarterback. I don't know where
he has
went
no
to college.
talent around him. That's the problem.
Yeah, I know. I'm largely busting chops here, but they're $4,000. I look for them to bounce back against this team. They're heavy favorites, 2 touchdown favorites, and if Haskins has to throw the ball more than 2 dozen times, you know they're getting at least 2 picks and possibly a pick 6. I love it. I think they're low risk. They are $4,000 on DraftKings, which does make them, somewhat prohibitive, but happy to pay up. I like the other defense in that same game that Devin mentioned. In terms of projections, Jacksonville, if you want to save a little bit of cash going up against Joe Burrow and his team, they've not been able to do much, including not beating Cleveland 2 weeks ago, not beating an inept Philadelphia team last week, and they're $3,000 the Jaguars are. So okay with rolling with them this week as well.
Phil, who do you like at defense?
Yep, had the Jaguars written down here. No one has allowed more sacks than the Bengals. And I think we mentioned it even earlier that the Jaguars' defense is not good, but they seem to be playing over their talent level so far this season. The one that I saw down the list, because I don't see the room to pay up this week with all these offensive players that I want a piece of. So the Texans are 2,500, and they've got Minnesota. That in and of itself is good for 2 to 3 sacks and at least 1 turnover. So at 2,500 on DraftKings, I think that they've got a floor, if not a ceiling. But I don't think that you're getting less than 7 fantasy points from them this week.
Let's
One
move
more
on.
deep sleeper.
Okay.
Kansas City Chiefs. They shut down what they were doing with their stunts and their blitzes. To shut down Lamar Jackson last week was pretty impressive. I think that Cam Newton, if they continue to blitz, could have a pretty long day. Spagnuolo likes to bring the pressure, particularly against these mobile quarterbacks. So it could be a big day. High sack upside, especially if they get up ahead early.
Nice. I like the deep sleepers. Let's go to you, Phil, and start off our stacks here. Who are you stacking this week? And tell us whether you think it's sort of a far out there stack or if it's sort of like a safer stack.
I think this one's a safer stack, and I mentioned it before. Dallas. See, I'm curious to see what happens with their roster percentages for tournaments, because I think that there might be a sentiment that there's no way that Cleveland is going to engage them in a shootout. And with all of these other games with these high totals that could more easily go back and forth maybe, I wonder if people are going to get back on Dak and his receivers as like real chalk plays, like in the upwards of 15 to 20% range. I don't think they are, so I like doing it. And I'm fine putting two of his receivers in there. I'm fine putting Dak Prescott with Schultz. I'm fine putting him with Elliott. I think there's going to be a lot of points on the Cowboys end, and then, like I mentioned, uh, I know that some of you guys like OBJ this weekend. That team is built to run the ball. It's all they've done so far. So if Hunt is out, run it back with Chubb. If Hunt is playing, I like Hunt better because I think he's the better kind of game theory play in a Cowboys heavy stack. And then the other one that I'm looking at, I had mentioned Joe Burrow earlier, and I think I would, if he's going to be somewhat popular, which I think he might be, because he's got Tyler Boyd that's coming off a couple of big games and he's at a good price. And then the rookie T. Higgins had a multi-touchdown game last week, and he's 4,500 on a week where you need some savings. So I think if people do stack Burrow, it's going to be with one of those guys. And the narrative out there is that AJ Green is just completely washed, and that might be true. But I still think that there's maybe like a 25% chance that he's still getting his sea legs. The guy hadn't played in like 18 months. So he might be getting his legs under him. He might be getting his conditioning. He leads the NFL, I think we might have said this last week, in unrealized air yards. So these deep throws that are going incomplete. And there's a big difference, I think, with last week when we talked about it, and he was getting shadow coverage from Darius Slay, to this week where he's going up against the Jaguars, and I don't know exactly who plays cornerback for them off the top of my head. So I would cut against the grain if I were stacking Burrow, and I'm giving AJ Green one more week to show that he's got something left in the tank.
Trying to make use of those prayer yards. John, tell us who you're stacking.
One thing I'm definitely going to be doing a lot of this week and very conscientiously doing it is game stacking. And you've heard us talk about that before, but this year, if you're really paying attention to what's winning with these high-scoring contests, it's got to be a game stack. So if you're one of these people, and this should not vary whether you're a single bullets GPP person or you're 150 MME, you need to be game stacking. I would say at least 80% of the time, and so that's basically a quarterback, his wide receiver or tight ends, and then running it back on the other side with a player from the other team because of the scoring that we've seen. I pulled it up earlier before the show. Right now, of course, I can't find it because I have too many tabs open, but I'll paraphrase. The league is averaging this year 10% higher points per game than any time in NFL history. That's a huge uptick. 10% doesn't sound like a lot. Like, I went to the grocery store and saved 10%. That's not a lot. We talk about something where we have a 50-year history and it's been the same every year. This is huge. These are huge differences. It's what we talked about in the top of the show with the Vegas value chart and just what's happening. Probably due to crowds aren't there to kind of shut down opposing offenses and fluster them and so forth. So game stacking is where it's got to be this week. And with that in mind, I love the Seattle-Miami game this week. We heard the Fitzmagic song earlier. I think you can run him out there with Devontae Parker. I think you could do a double stack with Preston Williams and get both of those guys. It's super cheap. Run it back with Tyler Lockett on the other side, who's a guy I talked about earlier, and you still have plenty to spend on some guys that you might like more, names like Kamara and so forth. So don't be afraid to game stack. In fact, I would encourage you to make it a rule moving forward, as long as these games keeps shooting out the way they have. And then I'll give you one more. I think Cam Newton with Edwards-Helaire, and then running it back with Clyde Edwards-Helaire on the other side. I think that I like that, and I wouldn't hate you if you ran it back with another Chief, because I think that they have plenty of scoring upside, obviously.
Devin, who are you stacking?
I mean, my favorite one's Hopkins and Kyler Murray. I touched on Murray a little bit earlier in the quarterback section, but I need someone's opinion here, because in a GPP, How insane is it to go with Baltimore's defense and Terry McLaurin?
I'm okay with it.
The theory is that they get out early, and you could even go, I don't know, Lamar Jackson or something, and the theory would be that they get out early, they get up, I don't know, 21, 28, nothing, and all of the yards then go through McLaurin.
Yeah, when I set up my lineup builder parameters, what I'll do is max players versus defense of 1 for exactly what you're describing. And it's happened, right? I mean, it happened. Think about the Cowboys and Falcons a few weeks ago. They threw a bunch, or they didn't throw interceptions, but they fumbled the ball a bunch of times in the first quarter.
Yeah.
Obviously, Atlanta's defense capitalized on that. So if you had Atlanta's defense and then you ran it back with somebody on the Cowboys side, you did quite well because they needed to use that deficiency to come up with all those extra points. I think it's a fine strategy, and it actually fits very, very well there, Devin.
Yeah, I think as long as it fits the narrative, which it does in this case.
And you would never do that with a running back, would you?
That's tougher.
Yeah, I think that's more difficult to justify.
Yeah,
typically,
I think
if you
it needs
have
to be a
defense,
receiver.
Yeah,
I think it needs to be a receiver or a tight end. I think it's tougher to do with a running back and a quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not impossible.
Maybe, but probably not smart to do.
Yeah.
If it was like a one-dimensional James White type guy, it might make sense, but not a normal running back.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Kareem Hunt type guy, yeah.
Any other thoughts here, fellas? All right.
Oh, Fitzmagic.
I take it back. That was your best one.
He's in my starting lineup.
Excellent. That's going to do it for our show. Check out our content at footballguys.com. We'll be back next Friday with our Week 5 episode. On behalf of John Lee, the singing Devin Knotts, and Phil Alexander, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com/DFS by clicking the button in front of Devin's face. And if you'd like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to press the button that's on Phil's face. And if you want to see our latest video, click that giant box that's in front of John Lee's face. Check all that stuff out. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.